G'day, May 40 here. So apparently there's another monkeypox epidemic. World Health Organization sounding the alarm about monkeypox epidemic. And monkeypox does not sound very nice, but there's one thing that's worse than monkeypox, and that's stigmatizing, right? The type of behavior that transmits monkeypox, such as participating in
discrimination that's
gay piss orgies. So monkeypox discriminates, all right? It overwhelmingly targets men who are wildly sexually promiscuous, participate in orgies, and you might be a prude and you might think that that should be stigmatized, but let me tell you, stigmatizing, all right, gay piss orgies, that is worse than monkeypox itself. We got a World Health Organization expert here.
A lot of stigma and discrimination that surrounds many diseases. And I think the key thing we need to look out for,
guys, we've got to stop stigmatizing participating in gay orgies. Luke has a very strong confirmation bias. He consistently demonstrates a tendency to interpret information in a way that confirms his pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. Yes, I think you are right. Who would you say in public life are the biggest exceptions to what you just said? I would love to learn from them. But watch out for stigmatizing participating in gay orgies, guys.
for is, as WHO, to work with our partners in communities and elsewhere to make sure that the messaging is correct. So while, for example, we're seeing, some cases amongst men who have sex with men, this is not a gay disease, as some people in social media have.
Yeah, it disproportionately affects gay men who participate in wild amounts of sexual promiscuity, but it is not a gay disease.
Have attempted to label it. That's just not the case. You don't need to have sexual contact in order to transmit monkeypox. Close personal contact.
I mean, it really helps, all right? It's overwhelmingly spread by close personal contact of a wildly promiscuous nature. All right, participating in gay piss orgies, really good way to transmit monkeypox.
Contact is sufficient.
All right, but the worst thing we could do is stigmatize that kind of behavior. So apparently many in the gay community are worried about the stigma that monkeypox...
Dinner with a purpose. Dozens fill a Toronto restaurant for a meal prepared by HIV-positive chefs. A night to bust the stigma that still stubbornly remains. Randy Davis, who's lived with HIV since 2015, is one of the chefs.
I'm a big believer in stigma being a combination of ignorance and fear. So we educate folks, that alleviates their fear.
Right, there's no realistic reason why you should stigmatize sexually transmitted diseases. All right, there's no realistic, rational, empirical reason why you want to stigmatize people who engage in reckless behavior that transmits deadly diseases. Right, there's absolutely no rational reason. All right, it just only comes out of ignorance.
A belief he's leaning on as fears swirl. The monkeypox outbreak could again lead to discrimination against men who have sex with other men.
And it always
Well, not just men who have sex with other men, but men who have sex with hundreds of other men.
seems to be easier to blame a group of folks who are marginalized, that are on the periphery.
Yeah, don't stigmatize people who engage in reckless, risky behavior that is the cause of thousands of deaths of completely innocent people, right? Such as with AIDS, overwhelmingly spread by reckless, risky behavior. And then people who behave responsibly were completely innocent. They had to die too, right? Because a tiny subset of men who participated in reckless, risky behavior, right, wildly, disproportionately spread HIV and monkeypox. But don't stigmatize that wild, reckless, antisocial behavior.
Of what is considered traditional society. We just don't want the same thing happening again with this virus and targeting it as a gay disease, because we know it's not.
Monkeypox is transmitted by close contact with an infected person or contaminated object. It can lead to a range of symptoms, but cases in Canada have so far been mild.
We need to recognize that this is not transmitted from and between gay men. This is transmitted between people.
Well, I'd say talk about science and talk about facts. Don't talk about communities. Don't
talk about communities, right, who practice reckless, risky, antisocial behavior. Right? Don't talk about the behavior that spreads these awful diseases, right? Don't stigmatize the communities that practice reckless, risky, antisocial behavior. Don't stigmatize them.
Stigmatize them.
This advocate says stigma could prevent.
Right, where we've got COVID, prevent people from going to church. And I'm open to, there was a good solid argument for making going to church illegal during certain periods of the coronavirus outbreak. I'm open to that argument. But public health authorities are very happy to discourage or render illegal going to church, but they are very frightened of picking on communities that engage in reckless, risky behavior, such as gay piss orgies.
Prevent some men from seeking treatment.
People who are not, let's say, not out to their families, not out in public, they may not come out to get vaccine or treatment for the fear of being outed as a gay person.
Misinformation about the virus, much of it homophobic, has been rife online, prompting doctors to fight back.
Trying to put the blame on a certain group in society is disgusting. Keep your homophobia in check.
Ken Monteith was diagnosed with HIV.
Right. Putting some kind of stigma or aspersion on the group that overwhelmingly spreads these awful diseases through reckless, risky, antisocial gay piss orgies, right? That's the biggest sin.
In 1997, he's concerned society will again blame and shame those with this virus.
We have to move past moral judgments.
Yeah, we have to move past moral judgments, guys. You have to move past stigmatizing reckless, risky, antisocial, deadly behavior that threatens to destroy the lives of tens of thousands of responsible citizens.
We have to start following science.
Advocates say the key is getting information and vaccines to those most affected, while not fueling fear.
We really have to make sure that we're getting the messaging out there based on facts, not conjecture.
An important.
Yeah, the fact that this is overwhelmingly spread by wildly risky gay piss orgies, all right, that's a fact, but it's not the type of fact that they want spread. Okay, let's talk about a great gay American, Matt Drudge, pioneering a blogger. And whatever happened to Matt Drudge? I notice a lot of people think that he sold his site. No, he didn't sell his site. He simply changed his politics. All right. So I was good friends with Andrew Breitbart, who operated the Drudge Report along with Matt Drudge for years. And Andrew was afraid of almost nobody, but he was afraid of Matt Drudge. And Andrew would confide in me about what it was like to work for Matt Drudge, about what a drama queen he was, about how he was very quick to cut people out of his life, that he was super sensitive to the smallest of slights. All right, that he was working for someone who was paranoid and who jumped on the Obama bandwagon and just rode that for years. All right, so whenever Andrew Breitbart introduced any skeptical links to stories about the Black Messiah, Barack Obama, Matt Drudge would take them down. Matt Drudge had no patience for any negative stories about Barack Obama. So Matt Drudge certainly has some conservative and libertarian leanings, but the guy also for years had a soft spot for Alex Jones and the wildest, most unfounded conspiracy theories. So he's essentially a drama queen, and he's all over the spectrum trying to get attention. Not all over the sexual spectrum, but all over the political spectrum, just trying to stay edgy and interesting. There's a new podcast out called Finding Matt Drudge, and here the host, Chris Moody, speaks to Joseph Cole, who edited the Drudge Report from 2010 to 2014.
About how influential Matt Drudge is, and that would get posted. And some of my colleagues have done that, and I would always shoot them a joking message saying, kiss ass, you're just trying to get yourself on the Drudge Report.
As the editor of the Drudge Report, people want to find out.
Right, the highest status people, all right, nationally syndicated radio hosts, people like Dennis Prager, people who are in public life, they desperately wanted to be linked on the Drudge Report. Like, so the highest status people would often make fools of themselves seeking to be linked from the Drudge Report.
How they can get in with Drudge or get their content onto Drudge. Tucker Carlson told me this story of him, when he launched the Daily Caller. I was a reporter there in those early days. We couldn't get on the Drudge Report. It just wasn't happening for us. And I know that it bothered Tucker because he had, we were getting scoops. We were writing stories that we thought were Drudge worthy. Can you tell me the story of your side of the story when
And do you know why Matt Drudge would never link to any articles on the Daily Caller? For the most petty of reasons.
Tucker reached out to you to have a chat?
Yeah, one time I got an email from Tucker saying, hey, let's meet up someplace. And he ended up coming out near my house, and we met at a Starbucks. And he said, hey, man, I cannot get on the Drudge Report. I don't know what to do. And, we're trying to start this big operation. And obviously, again, back in those days, Matt was really a kingmaker. I mean, if you got links on the page, you might triple your page views for the day just by a single link. If they were getting 300,000, they might get 1 million page views by getting the top story on the Drudge Report. So it would be huge, not only to the success of the web page, but also, for money, for advertising rates.
So there's absolutely no evidence that Matt Drudge has sold his side. All right, it still bears all the air marks of Matt Drudge's behavior. So he's still doing it. He's just not doing it very well.
You can charge and things. I'm looking at an old notebook that I have kept ever since my days there that from when he told me things not to run. And this is interesting. He said, no Newsmax, no Newsbusters, no Daily Caller, no Talking Points Memo, no Business Insider, and no Mediaite. He laughed at that last one because he was like, what a terrible name. You can't even say it, Mediaite. But if you'll look now, I mean, he runs several Mediaite stories every day. So obviously things keep changing. But that was back in the day when the Daily Caller was a banned site. So we met at a Starbucks, and Tucker said, what do I need to do here? Why can't I get on there? So one time when I was talking to Matt, I said, Tucker Carlson is distraught about not being able to go on the page. And Matt goes, well, he knows what he did. And I said, well, what does that mean? He's like, he did something and he knows what it is. And I'm not running his stuff. And so I went back to Tucker and I said, hey, Tucker, it sounded like you had done something and he was unhappy. And Tucker goes, oh man, that really still? He goes, we were both in the green room at Fox News one time. And I said to Matt, what are you up to? He was getting ready to go on a foreign trip. And, then they parted ways and Matt had been on the air and then left. And then Tucker goes on the air. And I guess they said to Tucker, hey, you were just chatting with Matt Drudge. And he goes, yeah, I hear he's off to Israel or Sweden or wherever he was going. And that made Matt so mad that he literally just was like, don't run anything from the Daily Caller. So after Tucker told me that story, I said, look, just give it a try. Just, do a groveling apology to Matt and say, you're really sorry. You didn't mean to do anything and you'll never do it again. And can you please run me? And I got a message back from Tucker a few weeks later saying, boom, it happened. He's accepted it and he's posted our stuff. So
there's a great story in this series about Tucker Carlson at Matt Drudge's first press conference when Matt Drudge spoke to the press club in Washington, D.C. And and Tucker Carlson admits that at the time I was just thinking of all the ways that Matt Drudge should be condemned because you had this innovative outsider who didn't always follow journalistic principles and he was breaking big stories. And the news media just absolutely hated Matt Drudge. And Tucker made the interesting point that when you're young, right, you're particularly susceptible to peer pressure. So you have someone doing something different. And as a result, Tucker admitted that along with the rest of the press corps, he just absolutely hated Matt.
I guess Matt got over it. And after a big formal apology, Andrew Breitbart told me a sort of a depressing story one time. He called me and said, this is after he had started Breitbart News, and he said, I can't get stuff up on Drudge. Matt had told me before Breitbart left, he was concerned that...
Yeah, Matt loved torturing Andrew, and Andrew had a wife, and Andrew had kids. Matt's gay, so Matt doesn't have to worry about protecting a family. And so Andrew was very vulnerable to the whims of Matt Drudge's mood. And Matt Drudge delighted in inflicting pain on Andrew.
That Breitbart was trying to cash in on the cachet of the Drudge Report. Breitbart was starting to get pretty famous. He was an outspoken conservative, really enjoyed mixing it up with people. And so Breitbart had started a new website. He was like, I can't get anything on the page. Matt said, well, go ahead and get the wires, and I'll try to link to you and through you to the wires, the Associated Press, Reuters, those types of places. Breitbart called me and said, I don't know why I can't get anything on the page. And a short time after that, I asked Matt about that, and he said, don't run any Breitbart stuff. And I didn't say why. I just said, okay. And he said, just don't run anything from Breitbart. Breitbart, I think, spent something like $100,000 to get the wires, which are very expensive. And it was more than a year before Matt came back and said, okay, you can post Breitbart things now. Now, I don't know what that was about, but Matt is kind of thin-skinned and somewhat vindictive. And so, it might have just been punishment. It's the way Matt deals with other people that...
Yeah, a lot of gay drama around Matt Drudge.
Is unusual. Anyone who's been his friend and then found that they're a former friend that never speaks with him again knows what I'm talking about. Like the story with Tucker Carlson, I never would have guessed it was that until Tucker told me that story, but Matt can hold some grudges.
Take me through your average morning and when you were...
Okay, here's the segment on why Matt Drudge turned on...
Okay, I'm getting lunch.
...on Donald Trump. So let me... fast forward here. Here we go. Why did Matt turn
Fair
on
Magazine,
Trump?
And here's what she said. Quote, Drudge and I are both leaving Florida, and we're not telling anyone where we're going this time.
Right, that's Ann Coulter, who was friendly with Drudge for years.
So I guess the mystery remains.
Right, let's get to the segment. Why did Matt turn against Trump?
We're more than just a technology provider.
Raised the question about Donald Trump, but didn't really answer it. How could he? Really the only person who could articulate.
Right, this is a journalist from the Columbia Journalism Review who showed up on Matt Drudge's doorstep in 2020, and Matt threw a fit and never answered his question why he turned against Trump.
Specifically, to the point where individuals on other big conservative media Trump allies start realizing it. And this was also something that then President Trump started.
So Matt turned against Trump in 2017, about the summer of 2017. I noticed it after Trump fired James Comey.
Started noticing in late 2019 and reacting to it within the halls of the White House with a sense of intense displeasure. He started asking friends, senior White House officials, other allies who he'd be speaking to, things like, hey, what's going on with Drudge lately? What's the matter with Drudge? Why does it seem like he hates Trump all of a sudden? I thought we were good. Got to the point where he even asked Jared Kushner to check in, to start basically investigating and calling around, or perhaps even reaching out to Matt Drudge to figure out why he's giving his dad-in-law such a hard time.
Why do you think that Drudge turned on Trump?
I'm going to quote a former White House official, quote, Trump understands Matt Drudge's influence. He knows he can be a little mercurial, though, and prone to stir the pot. He also knows Drudge isn't able to be bullied. Matt doesn't owe his career to anyone and can't be moved the way others can because he's not afraid, not just of Trump, but in general. So I think that kind of gives kind of a taste of a 30,000-foot view of what was going on there. Drudge kind of had a sense for the way the winds were blowing on this. Got to a point where in 2019 and 2020, where Matt Drudge clearly felt and thought that, okay, I don't need to carry all the water for this guy anymore. One of the things that really does account for that turn is that he decided to take this guy, Donald Trump, who he had politically buddied up to and sort of portrayed himself as a staunch media ally, and start turning him into what he craved the most out of the American political landscape, which was tabloid fodder to run through his influential internet machine. That's what he did with Clinton and the Lewinsky scandal. And if that's the way you're approaching the most powerful person or people on the face of the planet, and if you're someone like Matt Drudge, how could you not want to give Donald Trump that kind of treatment? It would be a waste of your at least ostensibly stated mission in life.
To get an insider perspective, I wanted to talk directly with former White House officials about this.
The more pressure you fall under, the more likely it is to reveal your character. And so Andrew Breitbart was taken aback. He was astounded. He was disappointed how almost all the high-powered conservative intellectuals would just debase themselves to try to get on the Drudge Report. It was such a huge deal for them.
Question. So I tracked down members of Donald Trump's administration and presidential campaign to try to piece together what they thought the reason was that Drudge turned on their boss. And I got a wide range of answers. The first person I spoke to was Hogan Gidley, who served as Donald Trump's White House deputy press secretary and worked in the administration from 2017 to 2020.
I heard it was all around the border, that the border wall wasn't built fast enough, and that's what made him mad. Don't know if that's true. I just heard that from some people, high up, close to the president that I worked with every day. And I heard him in passing. We were talking about it. I said, well, how did we lose Drudge? Or we had him, and they're like, oh, no, they were, Drudge was good to us, and then I think he was mad because we didn't.
So this is what I've noticed about conservatives like Ann Coulter, Matt Drudge, who turned on Donald Trump. They are attention-seeking, dramatic people. All right, I didn't expect Donald Trump to implement all of his policies. Right, I wasn't shocked that Donald Trump only implemented some of his policies, but what Trump implemented was far superior to me than Hillary Clinton. So Trump had enormous personal flaws, but overall, I think he was just simply clearly better for America. If you're not a drama queen, right, if you're not an attention addict, and you have right-wing tendencies, then you'd have to say that Donald Trump in 2016, 2020, and 2024 was far superior to the Democrat that he was running against. And so if you were an avid Trump supporter and then turned passionately against Donald Trump, it's because you're a drama queen, right? You can't deal with the reality of flawed human beings and having to weigh up competing values, because just on a realistic, clear perspective, Donald Trump was a far superior presidential option than Hillary Clinton, than Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris. And Donald Trump overall did a better than average job during his term as a president of the United States. He's not particularly good at running things. He's a deeply flawed character. But if you are passionately for Trump and then passionately against Trump, that doesn't say much about Donald Trump. That's all about you. You're a drama queen. You're an attention seeker. You are naive. You're a romantic. You want to see more to reality than's really there. It just shows that you have really bad judgment, that you don't have the stones to be able to look reality in the eye. I've got a ice cold version of reality coming up. I'll just mention it right now. There's a story in the Jerusalem Post. All right. U.S. presented Tehran list of Mossad agents involved in the Hania assassination. So if true, that is cold, but that is how nation states work, right? That's how your boss might work, right? You might devote yourself to your boss, and if he has sufficient incentive, he might, well, quote unquote, betray you. But what we call betrayal is simply our hyperbolic expression for other people having different priorities. The United States, in particular the Biden administration, has significant incentives to not have a major Middle East conflict. And so it wouldn't shock me if the U.S. turned over to Iran a whole bunch of Mossad agents so that Iran could assassinate them, if Iran would then hold off on some wider attack on Israel. Right? Different countries have different interests. Joe Biden has different interests from Donald Trump. Joe Biden wants a Democrat to be elected as president, and he knows that if there's a major war with Iran, oil prices will go up, and the chances of a Democrat being reelected go down. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Biden administration turned over to Iran a whole list of Mossad agents that Iran could then assassinate. And this isn't because Joe Biden or the Democrats are particularly evil. This is how the world works, right? People who are your friends and allies one day will turn against you the next.
Build the wall fast enough or something. That's what I heard.
And here's Steve Bannon, who worked on Donald Trump's first presidential campaign and then joined the administration.
He was definitely off the Trump train as far as policy goes, right? He just wasn't a supporter. You could tell that pretty obviously. The site went so negative Trump, but also so negative conservative and so negative MAGA. It's interesting.
Sam Nunberg, a Trump campaign advisor in 2015, thinks the reason could have to do with Trump's personality. The more time Drudge spent with Trump, Nunberg says, the less he liked him.
I think that Drudge played a pivotal role for Donald in 2016. And I think it played a pivotal role hurting him in 2020, turning against him. One of the biggest questions is going to be what made him turn against Donald. There are multiple theories. One thing I would think is the more time Matt spent with Donald, the less he liked him. You're not going to like what you see behind the scenes. It's not a nice picture. After the midterms as well, maybe Drudge just saw the writing on the wall as well, right? And didn't want to be with a loser himself. But look, we'll never really know the reasons, right?
That is probably a large reason, right? Matt Drudge didn't want to be associated with a loser. And he saw by the summer of 2017 that Donald Trump was headed for losing. And you can make a pretty credible case that Donald Trump lost the 2018, 2020, and 2022 election. I'm not saying that's the only perspective, but you hear the argument that essentially there's a 2-point swing against Donald Trump in the suburbs in 2018 and 2020. And the presence of Donald Trump in Republican conversation to be their presidential candidate very well may have cost Republican seats in the 2022 election.
We'll never know. You'll never get a straight answer. Ultimately, Donald became a victim of Matt the same way many others have. Did Matt make Donald lose the election in 2020? No. But Trump sure as hell could have used his help, and he didn't have it.
Sean Spicer, Trump's former White House press secretary, said there was surprise when Drudge started being critical of Trump, but then the relationship appeared irreparable.
There were a couple early shots that sort of surprised people, and then it was almost like the doors to the dam opened up, and it wasn't going to ever get closed again.
Sebastian Gorka was deputy.
Okay, that's enough on that. So, one easy trick to avoid getting monkeypox. All right, Charlie Kirk has a great tweet. You have to worry about getting monkeypox. You have a lot of other issues going on, right? Jerusalem Post reporting U.S. presented Tehran a list of Mossad agents so that essentially Iran could then assassinate them. Car insurance up 55%, right, during the Harris-Biden administration, because with the incentives that the Biden administration and the elite gave to police to stop enforcing the law, you had a lot more reckless driving and therefore a lot more insurance payouts. So as a result, car insurance up 55% under Harris-Biden. Okay, here's a young girl who is not too happy about having to marry an older Muslim man. Maybe we should have some skepticism about importing this culture into our lands. Or maybe this is just the type of diversity that we need. I mean, horrifying. This young girl here just terrified at having to marry this repulsive older man. Goes on all the time in modern Islam, along with slavery, right? Still a tremendous amount of slavery, clitoridectomy, right? Overall, the Arab Islamic world is about the least developed and most savage part of the world today. Good tweet here by the Fisher King. The reason people cannot define fascism is there is no definition. It was a reaction to communism, an immune system response to save people from murderous animals, so it took on different forms in different places, and it was never a program. There's no Das Kapital of fascism. After a lot of intense study and research, I've concluded the best way to prevent yourself from getting monkeypox is to avoid attending gay piss orgies. The raped Palestinian story was a lie concocted by crazy leftists in Israel against their country's own soldiers. Medical exam found no anal injuries to the alleged victim Palestinian, and said it appeared that he was just trying to hide a cell phone up his bum. Interesting discussion here with Scott Rasmussen, the pollster, about the differences between elites and regular Americans.
But you became very intrigued over the last year by this consistent outlier data from a subset of Americans. And you have since defined those as voters with a postgraduate degree earning more than $150,000 a year and living in a very high density area. So these are lawyers and doctors. And you have now conducted some surveys of these elites, as you call it, the elite 1%. And fascinating results. What are some of the things that you found in that polling?
Well, you know, the first research that we did on this was commissioned by the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, Steve Moore's group. And we found an enormous gap in terms of trust in government and individual freedom. Most Americans believe that there's too little individual freedom in our nation. But half of this elite 1% said, no, there's too much. And one of the subsets of the elites, the politically active elites, people who talk.
So one of the major themes on this show, and I was really woken up to this by COVID and the generally moronic quality of conservative responses to COVID. And one of my ongoing themes is the stupidity of the right. So I like the commentator NS Lyons, but I just read something you wrote on Substack saying we've got a media-run state. Right? He's saying the news media runs the United States of America. If that was true, Donald Trump would never have been elected. If that was true, Republicans would not have control of the House. If that was true, Donald Trump would not have been able to erect a new border wall and replace falling apart border wall on the southern border. All right, so much of public policy goes against what the media wants. So how delusional do you have to be to think that we belong in a media-run state? So I just don't have a lot of sympathy for this hyperbolic, attention-seeking, emotional drama queen overstatements to say, look at me, think about how I see the world in far more profound ways than you do. I recognize that the news media is running the United States of America. Right? Look at public policy. Look at the public policy that the media supports, and there are frequently dramatic differences. All right, immigration. Right, we generally have more restrictive immigration policies compared to what the media wants. Media is far more pro-affirmative action. The media is for far more government intervention with regard to COVID. Right. So in all sorts of areas. So if you want to hear about the media perspective, just listen to Scott Rasmussen here talking about the preferences of the elite. And the elite don't always get their way.
Politics all the time. 69% of them said the rest of us have too much individual freedom.
Okay, so that would be a representative elite perspective, that regular Americans have way too much individual freedom, such as the freedom to own guns, the freedom to homeschool their children, and the freedom to say what they think on social media. So from an elite perspective, regular Americans have way too much freedom. Right? From the news media perspective, right, there is way too much freedom for regular Americans. Right, but that does not translate into automatic public policy.
Talked about trust in government. 70% of these elites say they trust the government to do.
And that's largely true for media elites as well. They want to push government perspectives over conspiracy theories and misinformation online. So there are many ways of looking at the world here that the elites, and that includes the media elites, hold that is not represented by a public policy.
The right thing most of the time. Guess what? Hardly any voters do. About 22.
Right. So the elites think the government does the right thing most of the time. Hardly any regular Americans do.
% of voters. It's been 50 years since most voters had that kind of trust. So there's a big gap there. When you begin to look at policy issues and other things, you see enormous differences on topics ranging from education to climate change. And in the latest research we did for the Napolitan Institute, the number that jumps out at me is Most of these elites, even though their views on a range of issues are widely out of touch with most Americans, they believe most Americans agree with them on key issues. Among the politically active elites, 82% think most Americans agree with them on things. And that scares me because that lets them rationalize bending the rules a little bit to do what they want.
That's absolutely astonishing. I mean, a couple more things that came out of that first research you did for the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. 74% of the elites say their finances are getting better. That's compared with 20% of the rest of voters. You did this back when President Biden was still in the running, but they gave him an 84% approval rating compared with 40% from the non-elites. Large majorities of them have a favorable view of university professors, journalists, lawyers, and even members of Congress. That's astonishing to me. But here was another one that jumped out. 77% of elites support strict rationing of gas, meat, and electricity to fight climate change.
So if we had a media-run state, that's the type of public policy we would have. But we don't have that. All right, this is NS Lyons writing on Substack Notes 2 days ago. We cannot be reminded often enough that while in the Soviet Union they had state-run media, in our country we have a media-run state. All right, I know it's alliterative. It sounds clever. All right, NS Lyons used to have a lot of sharp things to say, but as regular people become more successful, it often goes to their head, and they start thinking they are more wise, more profound than they really are, and then they just start saying the most ridiculous things that sound impressive, right? That sound profound, but just completely fall apart upon examination.
Versus 28% of everyone else. I mean, the disconnect is mind-boggling. And yet, I think the important thing here in this is these folks, even though there's not very many of them, they hold positions of power. They are in influential positions. So we hear about their views more than everyone else's. Is that not part of the point of this?
That's absolutely the truth. These are people who know that if they're...
Okay, Elliot Blatt says people who use the term climate change are ignorant or deliberately trying to deceive. How do you know? I mean, I don't talk about climate change because I don't really know anything, but I suspect that I'm about as aware of the topic as you are. So on what basis do you make these sweeping distinctions? I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I doubt you've read 5 books on climate change, right? I'm going to go out on a limb and say I suspect that you're not more informed on climate change than I am. So I listen to a lot of conservative talk radio, read conservative publications. I'm quite familiar with all the conservative debunking of climate change. I don't feel like I know enough, so I certainly wouldn't want to be making those kind of sweeping statements. Look at the data, my dude. The data is that, well, that can go in many different directions, right? There's arguments that we're having more extreme weather, that the planet is hotter than it's ever been. So there is an overwhelming expert consensus on climate change. Doesn't mean that they're right? Because you have to, again, look. I have some sympathy for Elliot's point of view, because you have to look at the incentives. If you appear skeptical of climate change, all right, you will be effectively blackballed from many parts of academia that specialize in climate change. So there are apparently only a narrow range of options available to you if you want to specialize in climate change, and denial is not one of them if you're going to get any government grants or get tenure or to have good social standing at a university. My only issue with climate change is pretending that we are the cause for it and that we can somehow fix it. Okay, yeah, I don't know. I've listened to people on the left and, I've listened to people making the case for climate change. And one thing that makes me skeptical of climate change is how it always seems to end up pushing the same policies that they would want even if there was no climate change. So more and more government intervention, like a heavily socialist state, severe restrictions on the free market. It just seems to echo all their own preferred policy procedures and stances, even if there was no such thing as climate change. So if you study an area, you specialize in an area, and you only end up at the exact same point that you were before you went into the area, then I'm skeptical. Yeah, I'm old enough to... and also, yeah, changing the term from global warming to climate change is suspicious. All right? Because climate change in and of itself is not a threat. And there's certainly some evidence that some degree of global warming is a good thing that will make many areas that are inhospitable to human life much more hospitable. So I don't talk about it much. I share all your skepticism of it, but I'm not willing to dismiss it.
There's an issue they care about, they can go to the appropriate government official and get an audience, or they can go to their representative in Congress. These are people who are around media types and who are establishing media narratives. They are on corporate boards. These are people with a tremendous level of influence. A large segment of them went to what we might call the Ivy Plus schools, and those schools tend to fill the ranks of corporate boards and others. So yes, tremendous
journalists
as well. That's right. And at first, when I saw the numbers on trust and all of these other things we're talking about, I was a little puzzled, but then I just began to realize it's because they know them. The more recent research we've done shows that these people overwhelmingly recognize that if they care about an issue, they can get their congressman to listen to them. Among ordinary voters, only 11% have that confidence. It's not really anything more than these people are in a bubble and the government leadership is in it with them, which is what led us to do our recent survey on federal government managers. And what's a little bit chilling about that data is in many ways, their views, the people who are managers in the federal government today, they have views that align more with the elite 1% than they do.
Right. There's a lot of sloppy, inexact discussion of elites versus regular Americans. I love the way that he just breaks it down, makes it specific.
With the American people. One example, hot topic recently, social media censorship. Very few voters think the federal government should have the right to censor social media posts. A narrow majority of the elite 1% thinks it should have that. And by the way, 53% of federal government managers think that they should have that right to censor social media posts. Pretty dramatic difference.
And these are the people, just to clarify, these are the people that are making those decisions. I mean, these are the bureaucrats, right? I mean, when we say it loosely, the deep state, correct? And so I think another piece of research you had there that if they think a regulation is needed and know that voters oppose it, most of them, meaning more than 50%, said that they should just ignore voters and implement that regulation anyway.
Exactly right. 54% say, we know the voters disagree with this. They overwhelmingly oppose that. And we made it clear in the question, overwhelmingly oppose it, but that's okay. We think it's the right thing to do. This is a direct rejection of America's founding ideals. I mean, the voters are supposed to be in charge.
Here's what I find so interesting about this research, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is to me, I think it helps explain the mood out there that you see among many voters in the country, which is they feel as though they're not in control, that the government is not working for them, but rather against them, that there are these vast forces arrayed against the little guy. And I wonder if this doesn't help explain and account for some of the embrace of populism you've seen out there among both parties, this attempt to say, I'm for the average Joe, the forgotten man. I wonder if it doesn't explain some of the shifting voting patterns that we are seeing. For instance, more and more college-educated voters now voting for Democrats, more and more.
So this pollster, Scott Rasmussen, he's no longer with Rasmussen Polling, and I recently unfollowed Rasmussen Polling on Twitter, just very low IQ conspiracy mongering. So he's gone off to establish his own thing, and this is vital for getting clarity on the difference between elite opinion and regular American opinion. I mean, it's amazing that 80% of elites want more social media censorship.
Working class Americans voting for Republicans. Do you think that this helps explain some of those changes out there?
Absolutely. In fact, I believe that this views and approach of the elite 1% are the root cause of the political toxicity we have in America today, the root cause of this dysfunction, because they embrace a view that is pretty disrespectful of voters. They think we should have a government of experts. They think they should be making the decisions. And when other people get in the way, it's sort of annoying to them. So I do think that's a big part of it. Another part of it, and this goes back to what I mentioned a moment ago about they tend to think that most Americans share their views. We asked about specific issues. Regardless of your own opinion, do you think most Americans support X, Y, or Z? And their perspectives were...
Okay, and the definition of elite here, those with a postgraduate degree earning more than $150,000 a year and living in a high-density area. So these are lawyers, the doctors. These are the people called the elite.
Wildly out of touch. So about 3 out of 4 members of both the elite 1% and also among government managers think most Americans want to live in a city where guns are outlawed, in a community where guns are outlawed, and where private ownership of guns is banned. That's not where the public is, not even close. Most people in these elite circles do think most Americans trust the government and have these higher perspectives. And I think, Kim, when you were talking about it in a theoretical sense of how does it impact the electoral process, I picture it more. Imagine someone has gone to school, they've left home, gone to school, and now they're in this elite world, or they're a federal government manager, and everybody around them is sharing their perspective. And then they go back home and they meet their friends from high school. And their friends from high school are mocking members of Congress, are making fun of some of these things. I don't believe that these experts or elites would then say, oh, that's what most people think. They're probably thinking, what happened to my friends?
We're going to take one more break. When we get back, more with Scott
Rasmussen. I'm trying to run a show here. Come on. Let's keep it.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal.
Come on.
Deeply polarized country, and we have had very close elections for a long time. I've seen you voice your concern about that sometimes because you have pointed out that one of the merits of landslide elections, we haven't seen any now since I was a kid, but one of the merits is that there was clarity in the outcome of the election. No one could dispute it.
So I'm not a big fan of Republicans disputing the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election result. What tends to get black-holed in news media reporting is how often Democrats did the same thing in other races, such as in the race for governor in Georgia, Stacey Abrams in 2018, Hillary Clinton and the Democrats with regard to Trump winning in 2016. And at the same time, I recognize Democrats have a point that Republican election denial was more severe and more widespread and more damaging than the amount of election denial carried on by Democrats in previous years.
What do you envision happening this time? I'm assuming you're going to suggest that we are going to have another close election. And how?
So I follow mainly right-wing accounts on Twitter, and there was a great deal of rejoicing by one poll result that showed Donald Trump with a national lead of 1 percentage point today. But the polls are steadily moving even more overall in Kamala Harris's direction. So I think the Real Clear Politics average right now is 3.3 percentage points for Kamala Harris. So it was kind of pathetic seeing all these right-wingers celebrating the one poll result that showed Donald Trump in the lead, when the overwhelming majority of polls are steadily moving more and more and more, including today, more and more and more in Kamala Harris's direction.
Concerned are you about disputes over its legitimacy?
Oh, I'm very concerned. I do think unless something startling happens, it will be another close election. We know from our polling data that 60% of Democrats still believe Hillary Clinton was the legitimate winner in 2016. We know that 65% of Republicans still believe that Donald Trump was the legitimate winner in 2020. And so if this election is close, the only safe prediction is a losing team is going to feel that they were robbed, that the winner is not legitimate. This is a big concern. We've had 9 elections in a row where nobody has won more than 53% of the vote. 1984 was the last real landslide we had in America. And in that year, to the point you mentioned earlier, nobody said Walter Mondale could have won if he'd gone to Wyoming or Wisconsin.
Okay, comment in the chat, how can either side trust the results? Well, the same way that you trust anything else in life, right? You look at the evidence, right? How many people have been prosecuted for voter fraud? What is the evidence for voter fraud? And you don't just go by some videos where people take a box and you don't quite understand what's going on, so you immediately jump to the conclusion that there's voter fraud, right? There are people who devote their lives to analyzing elections and detecting things like voter fraud. And so you look at the evidence that they present, and then you look at the contrary evidence, and you make a decision, right? Who's got a more convincing case?
Somewhere else because he lost 49 states. That's an important part of the election process. It's not just picking the winner. It's adding legitimacy to the government itself. And you have that when you have a landslide. Landslides were very common up until 1972. And since then, the only real landslide we've had was 1984. We need that to purge the system. It's not going to happen this year.
Oh, well, that's demoralizing, but hey, let's look to 2028, okay? Last question, just because I want to finish and give you a chance to talk about your industry, the polling industry, because I know you've thought long and hard about this, but this is your opportunity to give listeners your little advice about how to look at polls. You wrote a great essay back in 2020, and I'm going to read a line from it. You said, public pollsters act like a bartender who keeps pouring whiskey for a drunk customer and is then surprised when the customer wrecks his car on the way home. I think the point you were trying to make is polls are not a crystal ball, but as people are going through this presidential election, what would you advise them as?
Yeah, so if you're saying the polls are wrong, all right, that's not a good place to be. You're in denial of reality. That doesn't mean that the polls aren't necessarily wrong. Doesn't mean you're not necessarily right, but the odds are that you're wrong and that you're just trying to shield yourself from some unpleasant aspect of reality that you don't want to come to terms with. Right, the reality is that Kamala Harris has been surging and Donald Trump has retained his voters. It's just that Kamala Harris has brought Democrats back into the fold. So right-wing media portrayed window covering at ballot center as nefarious. Here's what's really happened. All right, this is CNN.
Every American should be angry. You should.
Come on, mate. I'm trying to run a high-quality show.
You should be worried. You should be
bloody
concerned
hell.
At what has happened in the election.
Fox News personalities attempted to sow distrust about the legitimacy of the presidential election results.
Question every American is going to have to answer for themselves. Do you trust what happened in this election? You believe?
And the evidence is overwhelming that the vote count, certainly for the presidency, was overwhelmingly on the up and up.
These election.
On the other hand, there were unprecedented voting changes due to COVID that would encourage regular people who are not particularly nasty, all right, to question why, right? We had all these voting changes, so there is a reason why there would be increased distrust for the 2020 election results, right? Aside from bad faith and idiocy. Because we had all these election procedure changes, and it appeared that the Democrats pretty much got all the changes that they wanted, and they were simply more effective than Republicans at electoral voting procedure change.
Results are accurate. Do you believe this was a free and fair election? I have a lot of questions.
They implied Democrats had stolen the election through fraud and corruption without citing evidence. Okay, this isn't really what I want. Right-wing media outlets have portrayed a move at a Detroit ballot counting center as nefarious. City official poured cold water on the assertions, explaining to CNN Business that the measure at the center of the controversy is taken to ensure private voter data wasn't inappropriately exposed to the public. So we had reports from pro-Trump outlets such as Fox News, Breitbart, and the Gateway Pundit spotlighting a decision by poll workers in Detroit to partially cover windows. All right, the right-wing reports implied that poll workers were hiding improper activity from the public, but an attorney for the city of Detroit said the windows were partially blocked because of concern voter information could be wrongly revealed to the public. And you do have official electoral observers. I suspect that they were in the room. Hundreds of challengers from both parties were inside the central counting board all afternoon, all evening. Dozens of reporters were in the room too. At all time, people outside the center could see in through windows that were further away from counting board spaces. So when I hear the objections to the legitimacy of the 2020 count, and then I read the debunking of those objections. I always find the debunkings much more persuasive. Drop boxes are monitored. Does that make sense? Okay, you can come up with infinite number of anecdotes, right? You can just pour out things, but the more intelligent way to go is to look at the analyses of all these objections, and they just all fall apart upon examination. And one evidence of this is that no decent lawyer would take Trump's side, because to take Trump's side in claiming that the 2020 election results were rigged is to deny the obvious facts on the ground, that there was a 2% shift from Donald Trump in the suburbs, and that's why Joe Biden won. Okay, great Substack essay here by Noah Carl. Did women in academia cause wokeness? All right, so what happens when you get more and more women in academia? Right, and Noah Carl says most of academia's leftward shift is due to self-reinforcing processes, right? Social homophilia, meaning people want to be around people like themselves. Conservatives don't want to enter a profession where there aren't many conservatives. Political typing, conservatives feel that an academic career, generally speaking, is not for them, in the same way that many women feel a construction career is not for them. And also discrimination. Conservatives are discriminated against in hiring, research, and funding. But there's another possible cause of academia's dramatic leftward shift over the past 20 years and the rise of woke activism, and that is the influx of women into the institution. So why is that? Because from our survey results, and psychologist Corey Clark points this out, women are consistently less supportive of free speech than men. Women are consistently more supportive of censorship. Women are more likely to say that hate speech is violence, that it's acceptable to shut down a speaker, to shout down a speaker, that controversial scientific findings should be censored, that people need to be more careful about what they say, and that it should be illegal to say offensive things about minorities. All right, women far more than men support all of that. All right, women have a far greater aversion to harm and to conflict, so they interpret various forms of speech as harmful to certain protected, pet, vulnerable groups, and they wish to censor for that reason. So there's probably both a genetic and environmental component, right? Are these gender differences cross-cultural universals? We've got Arnold Kling notes, women have a social strategy that works well for protecting their individual health and the health of their children, emphasize safety, covertly undermine the status of unrelated females, and exclude rivals rather than reconcile with them. So these are all qualities that I have noticed in female-dominated spaces. Right? Women, as they move into formerly male domains, have made the culture of those domains more consistent with female tendencies. Right? And among those tendencies is a greater desire to curtail speech that it regards as harmful and dangerous. So we know, on average, women far less favorable to free speech, far more in favor of censorship than men. Women are also disproportionately represented in grievance studies, so disciplines like gender studies and critical race theory, which tend to usually just be a vehicle for left-wing activism. Right, 80% of bachelor degrees in ethnic, gender, and cultural studies are awarded to women. 65% of doctoral degrees in cultural, ethnic, and gender studies are awarded to women. Now women are pouring into biomedical science, which is more rigorous than grievance studies, but biomedical science, perhaps as a result of more and more women entering that academic discipline, are becoming increasingly woke. So, good essay here from Noah Carl. Women are far more likely to support dismissal campaigns, to support banning and blackballing and canceling. They are more likely to discriminate against conservatives. They are more likely to support diversity quotas for reading lists. Women overall in academia have significantly more left-wing views. If the share of women rises in an academic discipline, we should expect the balance of internal opinion to move in the direction of emotional safety over academic freedom. Women are less pro-free speech. Women are more pro-censorship. They are more left-wing in academia, more inclined towards left-wing activism, less inclined toward dispassionate inquiry. And they're disproportionately represented in the outrage disciplines like race and gender studies. So this is on average, obviously not all women. And so women often complain that they aren't given the same opportunities as men, but then when they enter difficult, demanding work, they then complain that they are harmed by what's going on.
It's been one of the worst years in living memory for Australian commercial television.
Did you just blow Bruce and Channel 7 up?
The avalanche started with allegations that Channel 7's flagship current affairs program, Spotlight, covered the cost of sex workers and cocaine to secure a blockbuster interview.
How did you feel about...
Right, if your boss says do whatever it takes to get the interview, then sex workers and cocaine is not necessarily off the table.
About the generosity extended to Bruce Lehrman by Channel 7?
Mortified, angry and embarrassed.
But it goes much deeper. A Four Corners investigation has found the dysfunction at Channel 7 is far more insidious and widespread. Two of the people we spoke to were so
there wouldn't be this dysfunction, all right, if the news media and TV news in Australia in particular was still male-dominated, right? You open up a tough, demanding job to women, and the type of injuries that many men will accept silently, women become outraged about and immobilized and become suicidal.
disturbed by what they witnessed. They spoke out despite being still on the 7 payroll.
It is one of the most degrading, soul-crushing places you can work in.
Be first to know every day.
Look, everyone knows that TV's all smoke and mirrors. We all put on a show.
Has Nate Silver changed his analysis? Yes. Today he moved it even more in favor of Kamala Harris.
But underneath the surface, it can be very dark.
A vicious culture encouraged by some managers.
The character in the play we've written wants to bash your head the fuck in with a cricket bat. Fucking lost the talent.
Right. Most people would rather work in TV than in insurance or at McDonald's, right? This is a highly in-demand job, right? You've got a lot of competition for a tiny number of jobs. This is a dying industry. Journalism is increasingly not economically prosperous industry, right? The economic basis for journalism is falling aside. And so you have to be particularly tough to be able to make it in a dying industry. And so if you insist on trying to make it in this difficult, demanding industry, you shouldn't be surprised that it's quite nasty. Right? You could go work at McDonald's or be a dog walker or work a ton of easier jobs. You chose to enter a highly competitive industry.
You can't.
Channel 7 likes to portray itself as a family. It's a very dysfunctional family.
We've uncovered multiple cases of discrimination, harassment and bullying. There are currently 3 legal complaints with 7.
So what you often find in these cases is that the pressure and the demands of the job is simply too much for many women, particularly, say, in the military. All right, women file far more demands for compensation. They're far more likely to get hurt. And so it used to be in a traditional society that you would try to save women and protect them from many of the grosser parts of life. But now in our more egalitarian age, women want in on many of the grosser, more competitive, more vicious parts of life, and then they are shocked and appalled and become suicidal at things that men put up with and accept as simply the price for being in a highly in-demand job where there's a lot of competition to hold a job, right? Who would not rather work in TV news than in a regular job?
Brought by staff for discrimination in the Sydney News Division alone.
This is an industry that Me Too forgot.
I wouldn't just call it the second chance club, I'd call it the third, fourth and fifth chance club.
We've spoken to more than 200 people for this Four Corners investigation. The stories many tell are...
So no one's putting a gun to these women's heads and forcing them to work in TV news. Right? They chose to work in this industry, right? And there's a ton of competition for their jobs. These jobs are difficult and demanding, and yet they stay there, and then they file complaints and file lawsuits. And then they might wonder why men don't want to hire women who are far more predisposed to file a lawsuit than just a regular bloke, or just either put up with it or leave on his own and not make a federal case of it.
Concerning. People describe being harassed, assaulted, viciously bullied at...
And this reporter is lucky. No one's going to sexually harass her. And is that what women want? To become invisible? Right. Not many women over age 25 get sexually harassed.
7 West Media. Some have ended up in hospital, unable to work. Some...
Then they're obviously not fit for that competitive, difficult environment. All right. This is in part rage at reality.
Some became suicidal. The dominant emotion I've encountered...
Okay, so if a woman in a tough, demanding newsroom becomes suicidal, is that the fault of her boss, or is that her fault? Right? Does she bear any responsibility for insisting on remaining at a place that's really bad for her? I have no doubt that many competitive jobs are bad for many men and many women, right? There are many difficult situations. There are many challenging bosses that are not for you, right? That there are a large number of men and a large number of women who do not belong in certain jobs because it will be bad for them. So if you're in a job that's bad for you, you should get another job. That's the stiff upper lip masculine approach. Rather than whine and complain and make a federal case out of things. If a job's bad for you, you quit and you take another job.
Over the past few months is fear. People are frightened about speaking out because they say they've seen the way that others have been.
All right, this is the ABC. This is the Australian National Government-sponsored broadcaster, and they're taking aim at a competitor, the Channel 7 commercial network. And no journalist organization is going to do this sort of reporting on themselves.
Crushed.
Right, who decides what's discrimination, what's bullying? Well, courts decide, but it is highly subjective. And people learn to work a system. And so we've developed all these anti-discrimination laws, and that encourages the type of personality that embraces victimhood. So prior to the 1960s, most people did not want to be considered victims. But since the 1960s, being a victim has become increasingly prized by large segments of the population because they could get many rewards from playing the victimhood card. Maybe we should rejigger our legal system, right? Do away with civil rights law and stop incentivizing the claiming of victimhood. And I'd apply this to conservatives too. I get sick of conservative whinging and whining that the media's out to get us. It's so tough being a conservative. I lose patience with that as well.
Began to understand this culture at 7 years ago, when I discovered the story of a young cadet journalist from Adelaide, Amy Torber. Back then, Amy Torber's family described how she had alleged.
So if she was ugly, she wouldn't get sexually harassed. If she was fat, she would be less likely to get sexually harassed. Right? If she was ugly and fat, she would have been less likely to have been hired. So every human trait, whether it's beauty or ugliness, right, comes with blessings and curses.
Sexual harassment by a man in her workplace.
My God.
Amy, can you tell me what happened at Channel 7?
Awful.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't.
Oh.
How does that make you feel?
Oh, my God. Oh, how does that make you feel?
It's frustrating because there's a lot I could say. It's not a nice feeling to be silenced.
Oh, God. Oh dear.
Amy Torber can't discuss what led to her NDA, but she can talk more generally about the notion of media companies gagging former employees.
It is a little bit odd, isn't it, that, you know, the media is about exposing injustices and telling people's stories and not shying away from it. But I suppose if you look at it in that respect, NDAs are there to silence people. And
well, I'm curious, did anyone put a gun to her head and force her to sign the NDA? Or was she incentivized to do it with money and other payoffs? But for all the problems with civil rights culture, we should be glad that we don't live in a time when it was illegal to be ugly. Right, this is National Geographic. The history behind one of America's cruelest laws. For nearly a century, so-called ugly laws banned people with visible disabilities and diseases from public spaces, revealing society's harsh standards of beauty and the impact on those who didn't meet them. My God, from the mid-19th to the mid-20th century, ugly laws banned ugly people from public places across the United States. My God, I'm so glad we don't live with this anymore. Right? As cities expanded, public spaces became more crowded. There was a growing emphasis on maintaining order and aesthetics. San Francisco was the first city to make it a crime for any person who is diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed so as to be unsightly or a disgusting object to expose himself to public view in 1867. This legislation quickly spread to other cities and states, targeting people with visible disabilities. And there are similar laws in the Torah, right? There are certain rituals that you cannot perform as a priest if you have a visible deformity, right? Because the liberal perspective is, oh, let's focus on rights. Ugly people have rights. The conservative perspective is, what about the community as a whole? Right? There are many benefits from restricting ugly, diseased, maimed people from public thoroughfares, right? Particularly due to them often begging and just being disruptive. Right? As part of a larger effort to regulate public behavior and enforce social norms, often appearing alongside restriction on racial integration, immigration, and vagrancy. Author of the book, The Ugly Laws, Disability in Public. I think there are probably many benefits to these laws, and I also see downsides, but I don't think that it's just so obvious that these laws are heinous. Whatever happened to Matt Drudge echoes a past 40 live stream. Yeah, I did 3 live streams about Matt Drudge back in 2020, and now I have new information, so I'm updating the topic. Some justified the laws as a public health measure under the mistaken belief that seeing someone with a disability could make a healthy person sick. Is that really a mistaken belief? Right? You are improving aesthetics and very possibly public health with this kind of discrimination. Others argued allowing disabled people to beg for money made it too easy for pretenders to take advantage by faking a disability. And that happens. Right? The laws seem to have been most strongly motivated by revulsion. When you're on your way to dinner or to visit your beloved, or you have composed in your mind the last stanza of the new poem that's given you such trouble, it's not agreeable to be confronted by some loathsome vision. Right? Maybe there should be streets where it's appropriate for ugly people to walk on, and then other streets that have stricter aesthetic requirements. Whatever happened to Bob Guccione? He died years ago. In the mid-1910s, a 35-year-old Cleveland man with clubbed hands and feet had to give up his job selling newspapers due to the law, and he struggled to support himself and his family until a local drugstore owner permitted him to sell from the shop's front stoop so he'd be on private rather than municipal property. That sounds like a great solution. The obvious function of these laws was to prevent and discourage people with visible disabilities from being in public spaces asking people for money. Well, if this is indeed the primary purpose for these laws, then I think they're great. Some of the law supporters believe that if disabled people were moved from the streets into institutions, they would receive better care. I'm sure that's often correct. This approach only led to further marginalization by stripping disabled individuals of their right to self-determination and isolating them from the rest of society. Well, does society have any vote here? Does the community have any vote here? Right? This is the same sort of argument that keeps homeless people and crazy people polluting our streets. So if I had to choose between traditional standards of decorum and modern day urban democratic stronghold standards, I think I'll go with traditional standards. Ugly laws' lasting impact. The last recorded arrest to an ugly law was in 1974, but their legacy continues to influence attitudes toward disability and the public sphere. Instead of public ugly laws, cities now have sleek sidewalk management plans to prevent or deter acts by some people that others think are not a good look. Yeah, crazy, insane, criminally inclined, drug addicts, alcoholics, and freaks. People standing too long on public sidewalks, sleeping there, defecating there, right? Yeah, I am for maintaining public order and traditional standards. All right, here's what's going on. The shocking things in Australia's Channel 7 network.
To stop them from exposing injustices.
In an organisation that's supposed to be about finding the truth.
Right, there's an infinite ability of human beings to come up with injustices. And I know from my work history, my mind is at least 10, 20 times more inclined to go to where I think I have been dealt an injustice than to consider how I have dealt injustices to others.
Truth.
Yeah. Exactly.
Amy Torber is not the only person silenced by this powerful media company.
Wait,
so one of the
chose
paradoxes
to
about
sign on.
the commercial news industry.
Right, no one signed an NDA with a gun to their head. They all chose it because there was a financial payoff in all likelihood. So stop elevating these women to ace victimhood status.
Is that while they are ostensibly there to report matters of public interest.
So this is attorney Josh Bornstein. In 2016, there was some website that published this deranged right-wing, impolitic critique, I think, of Jews or some hot-button issue under his name. And it was just done to mess with him. He was not very happy.
Try and suppress any matters of public...
Right, this guy's a left-wing activist.
...interest that might affect their brand adversely. And they do that through the use of NDAs.
Non-disclosure agreements.
Non-disclosure agreements.
We tried to speak to former Seven staff who had made complaints including being terminated while on maternity leave, bullying and sexual harassment, and some who had just been let go in sudden redundancies, only to discover that Seven had signed them up to agreements that gagged them forever. Solicitor Josh Bornstein is currently
Right, so they didn't sign these agreements without some kind of payoff, right? This point isn't made.
Acting for numerous commercial television clients, including from Channel 7, and says NDAs are common practice.
Oh my God.
What the NDAs do is mask the reality of a brutal workplace culture.
There are all sorts of reasons why to maintain any kind of culture in your home, in your community, in your church or your synagogue. You discourage people from speaking out about awkward, embarrassing things.
Which women particularly are mistreated.
Right, because women are more in touch with their emotions than men, and that has many wonderful upsides and some downsides. And because they're more in touch with their emotions, they are more in touch with their negative emotions as well as positive emotions, and therefore they are more likely to complain than men.
Very badly and routinely.
Have you heard about people being hospitalised because of what's happening to them at work?
Yes, I have.
How do we know that they were hospitalized because of what happened to them at work? Don't they bear any responsibility? Are they just sheep? Are they just total victims? They have no sense of agency. They're just unable to take care of themselves. If indeed they are, the very way they are presented in this TV program, that they should not be allowed to vote, right? They should have a man in their life who takes responsibility for them, because this TV program presents them as incapable of taking on adult responsibilities. right? They are incapable of saying no. They are incapable of making rational adult choices. And if indeed that is true, if they are incapable of the responsibilities of adulthood, they're incapable of the responsibilities of having a sense of agency, then someone should take on a guardianship for them.
Have you heard about people being fired on maternity leave?
Yes.
Oh my God. Right? Employers have interests too. Right? If your pregnancy damages your employer's business, why should they not be allowed to fire you? Why should employers be forced to keep on people who are terrible for their business?
Have you heard about people attempting suicide or having suicidal thoughts?
These sound like highly unstable people who should get some help, and it may not be the boss or the job that is primarily responsible for their emotional distress.
Unfortunately, yes.
Have you heard about people being sexually harassed?
Repeatedly.
Oh,
so what does this all say about these workplaces?
That this is an industry that Me Too forgot.
It's an industry that is increasingly difficult to maintain. It's a dying industry, right? TV news, like other parts of journalism, is increasingly disappearing as a viable economic business. And so it's really, really tough to try to make it in this industry, yet it has glamour and excitement. And the people who go into it, they go into it precisely because it's more exciting than a normal job. But this comes with a price.
The Torber family explained that when Amy had complained to management about sexual harassment, 7 Human Resources turned on her, doing a deep...
Yeah, Human Resources is not there for you. Human Resources are there for the employer. Right? Human Resources is not taking your side. Right? Human Resources works in the interest of the employer. This is an elementary, commonsensical notion that people should understand. Right? Don't confide in Human Resources if that's likely to damage your job prospects or your standing at work. Right? Don't make a nuisance of yourself at work. Right? If you're going to be a nuisance at work, you'd probably be better off finding another job or getting therapy or the appropriate 12-step program so that you can address your issues that are driving you to be a problem.
Deep dive into Amy's emails and confronting her with allegations they'd never raised before. Other human...
This happens to almost anyone who becomes awkward in a job, right? The owners, the managers, sick Human Resources on them to find ways that firing the person becomes legal.
Human Resources professionals who worked at 7 remember Amy's case well and were appalled at what was done to her.
And guess what? There are probably people who've interacted with Amy over the course of her life who've been appalled by her behavior. Right? She's a human being. She has needlessly hurt other people like we all do. There are times that she's been less than honorable, right? Like everyone else, there have been times when she's been dishonest, and there are times when she's been despicable, right? Everyone in certain contexts is going to behave poorly, right? Nobody has just an exemplary record as they go through life.
This was a tool. This was a widely used tool, a tactic, an approach.
A tool and a tactic and approach that pretty much all businesses use. So wake up and smell the coffee.
Only my experience working there.
This former HR worker knows of other cases where this tool was used against innocent staff.
So employers often don't want to hire a woman who's going to get pregnant because it's not in their interest. Employers often don't want to hire people from certain categories who are less likely to be good employees. Employers tend to want to operate in their own self-interest, just like employees, right? Employees try to rip off their employers as much as possible, right? Employees try to get as much money as possible while doing as little work as possible for an employer. employers try to extract as much work as possible from employees while paying them as little as possible.
We're interviewing her via a Zoom call because even speaking out anonymously is a risk. She's seen firsthand the tactics management uses.
Were you, when you were at Channel 7, instructed to go through staff emails in order to be weaponised against that staff member?
Look, if an employer wants to fire you, they will commission a search to find a legal basis to fire you.
Yes.
How did you feel about doing that?
In reflection, and now, having the experience I do have in my career, I feel sick to my stomach. And
guess what? Most people who have held down jobs have at times had to do things that were distasteful to them, right? Pretty much everyone who's held a job has had to do things that they didn't like, right? There's a reason they call it work. You're effectively, when you go to work, you're a slave. You can choose your slave owner for 40 hours a week, but you don't get to escape the cold reality that when you go to work, you are a slave.
And I feel like it's a gross misuse of internal policies that are intended to be there for ethical reasons.
These high-minded, highfalutin principles. Look, most people are primarily out for themselves. This is equally as true of men as it is for women, for employers as it is for employees. Everyone can spin a sob story, right? I guarantee you that there are people around this particular woman who's speaking and the woman who's asking the question who have felt hard done by these women, right? Who have been taken advantage of, who've been manipulated, who've been deceived, who've been mistreated by these women, right? As we go through life, we inevitably step on the toes of other people.
And kind of a warping of those policies to suit, again, an orchestrated end result.
God, wake up and smell the eucalyptus, as Elliot Blatt notes. That's it.